Hello, everyone, and welcome. It's the middle of the week, and so again, we're checking in. And from time to time, I've had the chance to talk to some of the folks from our own congregation at Westview. And today, I'm delighted Doug Lynds has agreed to have a conversation with me. And I think we've all had unique challenges through this lockdown. Every one of us has a story to tell. And I think there may be some stories that overlap a little bit. And I wanted to invite Doug to come and have this conversation because part of his unique challenge during this time is that his wife has been living in a nursing home. And so they have been separated during much of the lockdown, and her presence at that nursing home is as a result of dementia that she is living with. And so I wanted to ask Doug to share a bit about his experience, his wife Janet's experience. But before we dive into that, Doug, thank you, welcome. And for those who haven't met you or maybe have seen you but don't really know you, tell us a little bit about yourself, about your wife, Janet.
Okay. Yeah. I was born and raised in Windsor, and I met Janet at a dance. And being a Baptist, I didn't know much about dancing, so I convinced her to take a walk down the street instead.
Okay.
And that got things started. And 2 years later, we were married. Janet is an American. Until we're married, she lived in Detroit. So she moved to Windsor when we got married. And that's how things got started.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been married for 51 years.
51. Wow. So last year was a milestone.
Yes.
Wow. So in the last few years, and you can tell me the specifics how many years ago, but obviously you noticed and Janet noticed some changes in her. When did that happen? How did the two of you start to notice that?
Well, I would say it probably was 7 years ago. And my kids, Megan and Matthew, noticed it a little more than I did. Maybe I was, because we were together a lot, I tended not to see it. But it was little things, forgetful things. There was one example where Janet was going somewhere with Megan, and she needed to go across town to Oak Ridge. We were living in Old North. And she left, and I was at home. And 10 minutes later, she came back and said, "I can't get to Megan's house. Oxford Street is shut down." I said, "Well, just go up to Fanshawe, go across, and back down Hyde Park, and you'll be okay." And she would know that. "Oh, I can't do that. Can't do that." So I got in the car and I drove her, but it struck me a bit at the time, more in hindsight, that those were things that would have been real easy, but now became difficult.
And did Janet pick up on that as well?
No. And I began to see a few more things. And so at our next visit, a visit to our family doctor, he did some cognitive tests. And from those cognitive tests, he set an appointment up with us at Parkwood. And that was April of 2014.
Okay.
And so we had that visit, and that led immediately, right on the spot, to a diagnosis.
Wow.
And Matt was with me and Janet at that time at the doctor's office, specialist. And again, Janet said, "Well, that's just old age. That's just things that happen when you get a little older."
Mm-hmm.
And he was almost abrupt in saying, "We know the difference between old age and dementia. And this isn't old age, this is dementia." And very, very specific that way.
Yeah. I mean, it must have been a huge emotional shock to to both of you.
Yeah. Yeah, the reality of it. I mean, we had our suspicions,
Mm-hmm.
and we were pretty sure there was something serious there by that time.
Yeah.
But it's one thing to think that, and another thing for a doctor, a neurologist, to say that.
Right. Yeah.
And then from that, there was an MRI was taken over the next month or two, and originally the diagnosis was Alzheimer's, and Alzheimer's is about 65% of all dementia is Alzheimer's.
Mm-hmm.
But there are other dementias, and there's sort of subcategories. But one of the categories is front temporal lobe dementia.
Okay.
And in Janet's case, the subcategory of that is a problem with behavior. What happens, I guess, is that in that front section of the brain, there's filters, and the filters get so damaged they don't function. So things that one might think but don't act upon, Janet just went ahead and acted upon them.
Okay.
So one time we were in Superstore going down an aisle, two of us, and a guy comes along, says something, I forget what, and Janet hit him.
Oh, okay.
So he went running down the aisle.
And that just wasn't her.
Yeah, but those things would happen from time to time, both with myself and with Megan and Matthew.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I mean, it just must feel like your world was turning upside down.
Yeah, and we started to learn. Like we went, three of us, kids and I, went to weekly sessions at McCormick,
okay.
and that helped us because we were in a group session with people who were struggling with the same issues.
So this was like a support group for families?
Yeah, at a very early stage though. So a lot of the people in that group had moved further down the road. And quite frankly, it was quite scary in thinking that, gee, someday this is what might happen.
Right. Okay. So at that point, what did it mean for you to care for Janet?
It was easy at the start. Just to go back a step or two, Janet retired when she was 57 because she was able to, she's a teacher, and she was able to retire at that point. I retired maybe a year and a half later. So we're in our late 50s, and we're both retired. Our kids are married and out of the house. So we traveled quite a bit. And I remember sitting down one day and adding it all up, and it was a 10-year period. We traveled four or five times a year. And so we had that, and it was a tremendous blessing. Even under that condition, it was a great blessing.
Yeah.
But realizing it in hindsight, it was huge. But as time went by, that became more difficult, and as more time went by, that became impossible.
Right.
So let's see, Megan and I and Janet had a meeting with CCAC about a year and a half. Let's see, when would that have been? That would have been early 2015.
Okay.
And what we were trying to do there was get an acknowledgement that Janet was eligible for the day program at McCormick. We thought that would be good because that would give me some respite, give Janet a challenge.
Yeah.
Out of that, in that meeting, the CCAC person said, you really should be getting on the waiting list at a nursing home, and this was really a shock.
Yeah.
One of the bigger ones.
Okay. Yeah.
But we did, and I had power of attorney, but Janet didn't object to it because they said, the waiting list is really long.
Yeah.
But you go on the waiting list, say at McCormick in the ward category, and you stay there, and it's a 9-year waiting list. It was then.
Yeah.
Then when you think you need to, you move over to the private or semi-private list. That's a lot shorter, but you bring your seniority with you. So you can move further up the ladder quicker. So we did it, and we never really thought too much more about it. Later, it became critical.
Yeah. I mean, when you say, you talk about that being one of the bigger shocks, talking about a nursing home, I mean, essentially you're talking about, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm hearing you saying, here we are, we're a married couple, we're in our own home, we've been enjoying life together. Now we're talking about a physical separation.
Yeah.
Not because the marriage is broken down, but because care has changed.
Yeah. And against the advice of my children, we were still traveling.
Okay.
We went to Florida in February of 2016.
Yeah.
We had to cut it short. It was really a disaster. Something I shouldn't have done, but it probably showed where my mind was. I wasn't in denial, but I was trying to slow the process down by being as normal as I could.
Right. And presumably you felt like you could handle whatever situation arose.
That's it.
Yeah.
And my career life was taking a problem and then finding a solution. In this particular case, I take the problem, but then I wouldn't be able to find a solution.
Right.
A little frustrating. And then during those times, there's something called the executive function. And in dementia, it means that things like putting a meal together, where you start with buying the groceries, and then you gather the ingredients, and then you organize it so that the different parts of the meal come together at the same time. Janet lost that.
Right.
And
which is a normal part of the onset of dementia.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so like vacuuming. She actually liked vacuuming. But she would vacuum a room and then put the vacuum back in the closet. And I'd say, well, there's another room. Oh, so pull the vacuum out again. But then once you finish that second area, put the vacuum back. So eventually she wasn't able to do that. So I guess what I'm getting at is I took over the meals, I took over the vacuuming, I took over the laundry. Not that I minded, but it was tough because those were the things Janet wanted to do, but she couldn't do them anymore.
Right. Was she expressing frustration through this?
No, she said she tended, part of her personality was not to be terribly confrontational. She could get stubborn, but not really confrontational. Yeah. So she would just go more inward. And she had her books, and she just read and read and read over the years, like maybe 50, 60 books a year. One of the things I noticed in the room she sat, there was a book. And from day to day, the bookmark never moved.
Okay.
So she was reading the same page over and over again.
Right.
And that kind of shocked me.
Right. So then at what point did Janet make the move into a nursing home? What happened there? Yeah, and presumably her name came up.
Yeah.
On the list.
Well, she had a seizure in March of 2016. And that was really scary. It was the middle of the night. She was getting back into bed. She wasn't quite in. The seizure hit. She fell out of the bed, hit her head on the nightstand, and became unconscious. Called 911 and everything. All that happened.
Yeah.
And then that was leading me, probably even at that time, but even more after that, to be not able to sleep.
Mm.
I, I, I was afraid to sleep because I was afraid something would happen if I
Right.
wasn't aware.
Yeah.
And so I started to go downhill a bit myself.
Mm.
My kids became quite alarmed, and again, CCAC had advised me to do a daily diary.
Mhm.
And when I shared that with them, they they more or less said, like, "You've got to do something because this has probably gone too far
Right.
in terms of Janet's safety
Mhm.
and maybe my health, but
Right.
particularly Janet's safety."
Yeah.
So I triggered, through my power of attorney, I triggered the movement from Janet on the um, one list over to the other,
Mm.
not realizing the timing of what that would do.
Mhm.
5 days later, I got a phone call
Oh,
saying there's an opening at McCormick,
wow.
and if you don't go, you go back down the list
Mhm.
and start over again. So I wasn't really ready.
Yeah. You hadn't wrapped your head around it all.
No, and I figured, well, I could hold out longer. Like,
Yeah.
this was May, I was thinking Labor Day,
Mhm.
and by 26th of May, she was a full-time resident.
How did you cope with that? I mean, I talk about wrapping your head around it. It's your heart as well that you're trying to
Yeah,
wrap around.
the, the only thing, and through all of this,
Yeah.
that and all the other events, I came to believe, and I very strongly believe, that Janet is safe.
Mm.
Janet is safe. McCormick is extraordinarily good.
Mm.
Um, and she has always, and again, part of this is her personality, but she never appears to be upset.
Mm.
In the early stages, it was more focused on trying to escape. Like, she would go through the fire alarm at the fire door,
Yeah.
and the alarm would go off, or she would try to get out along with visitors who were leaving. And
Mhm.
they
Yeah.
even posted her picture on the wall to say, "This person is a resident, not a visitor."
Okay.
Uh, and But then a change occurred, and one day I got the bright idea of putting her in the car and going for a coffee at Timmy's,
Mm.
which I was kind of allowed to do, but they didn't really encourage it. But
Mhm.
they allowed me.
Mhm.
So I get Janet in the car and going along Wonderland, and I could tell she was upset.
Mm.
So I looked over and I said, "What's wrong?" She said, "Well, there's a music program this afternoon, and if I go with you, I'm going to miss it."
Oh.
And I knew there was a music program, but it was like 4 or 5 hours from
Yeah.
this time.
Yeah.
But so I turned the car around, went back, and I thought, this is a blessing.
Yeah.
Janet has bonded
Right.
with McCormick. And once I knew that, that took a lot of pressure off, because I not only knew that it was a good place for her, she was she was at a point where she had accepted it as well.
Right.
So
Yeah.
no more trying to escape.
Mm. Mhm. Yeah. I mean, that must have given you an incredible amount of peace.
Yeah. And what I've also done over the years, up until the virus, was to go regularly,
Mhm.
not every day,
Mhm.
not all day,
Mm.
but regularly.
Right.
And that has worked well for me, because I believe I have to have a life
Yeah.
outside of McCormick,
Mm. Mhm.
outside of visiting Janet,
Yeah.
because otherwise my health is not going to hold up.
Right. Right.
So that's part of how I believe one copes with it.
Sure.
Certainly my faith is where it really comes from.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting to hear you say that, and I do want to tap into, your faith as a resource. But
Yeah,
I know some people really struggle once a spouse is in a nursing home, struggle to feel like they can have a life outside of that nursing home. It's almost as though they're being unfaithful. Um,
yeah. And one of the things that my kids and I do again, before the COVID, every Friday afternoon when they're finished school,
Hmm.
we meet. The three of us meet with Janet at
Hmm.
4:30 every
Hmm.
Friday. We spend a half hour with Janet,
Hmm.
and then she goes up and has her evening meal.
Hmm.
And often we stay for another period of time, so that contact with family is huge.
Right.
Contact with friends is huge.
Yeah.
Um, One of the things my sister said, she had lost her husband rather unexpectedly. She said in coping with it, she did something every day.
Hmm.
And that something may be going to the grocery store,
Hmm.
even if it's to buy one item,
Hmm.
but something to sort of make the day into something rather than sit around.
Right. Right. Yeah, and I think we can underestimate the power of those simple actions or simple routines.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I, through Janet's influence, I started to number of years ago, started to seriously read.
Hmm.
And reading has been great for me.
Hmm.
I also have a dog.
Hmm.
I've always had a dog.
Okay.
And the dog becomes my companion in the evening while I'm watching baseball or
Oh,
whatever.
good. What's your dog's name?
Piper.
Hyper. I'm guessing at the personality.
Yeah, yeah.
Good. So I mean, you've got relationships.
Yes,
It sounds like your son and your daughter have been an incredible support to you. You've been a support to each other
yes,
while you walk with Janet through this.
yeah.
And you've mentioned your friends. You've mentioned hobbies and routines that you've got.
Golf is good.
Golf is good. Okay,
Yeah.
good,
And particularly golf with Matt in the summertime because he's got the summer off. That's been
good,
particularly good. And
good.
particularly this year.
Oh, great. Good. So, but let's talk about this year because you've had routines of going in to see Janet, spending time
Yeah.
with her, and then all of a sudden in March, that stopped. What
Yeah,
was that like?
we were there on a Friday afternoon at the start of spring break. So that
Hmm.
was like mid-March.
Yes.
And when we finished our visit, they were going to go on their break. And by the next morning, things started to really shut down. That's when the nursing homes shut down.
Right.
So without we knew there were problems, but we never could imagine that they'd turn out to be the level.
Yeah.
So I didn't see Janet from then until mid-June.
Wow.
Yeah. But again, I go back to that would be a real worry to me if I didn't have confidence in McCormick,
Right.
because they have a program or a process. They still have it now, where they call me 3 times a week,
Mm.
like on a group call,
Yes.
and the director is on this call. It's live for her, and she's giving us an update. She's telling us the situation at McCormick, which has always been um, uh, virus free.
Mm.
But still, we know
Mhm.
we don't have to wonder what we hear in the papers as to whether they're okay or not,
Right.
and letting us know about any issues that are pending.
Good.
So you
So,
work through it,
yeah.
and in a sense, it was, I worked through it when Janet was home just before she went into the nursing home.
Hmm.
That feeling of isolation and sort of the world's closed in on me
Hmm.
because I couldn't move
Right.
during those days.
Yeah.
So I had some practice, but it was awfully reassuring when we were able to start up again at McCormick.
Yeah. Now, did you notice a difference in Janet when you did get to see her again?
It's hard to tell. Like
Hmm.
she's at a point where for the last 2 years she has not spoken.
Okay.
She is either in her wheelchair or her bed.
Hmm.
She's not mobile.
Hmm.
Um, and you can catch the odd uh, something in her face, but it's becoming more difficult. She's becoming more inward
Right. Right.
than she was. The only connection I currently have is music.
Mm. Yeah, tell
Uh,
us about that because that's
and
fascinating.
it is, and it was kind of accidental, but um, I eventually got into the 21st century by getting an iPhone.
Okay.
And once I had an iPhone, I started to think, what could I use this for?
Mhm,
And there's a thing called Spotify, an app called
mhm,
Spotify. Spotify is a, a world of music,
mhm,
any kind of music, anything you want to have. So I have that on my phone. I'm able to create a playlist. I I was sitting with her over the last, I guess, almost a year now, um, playing the music that I thought she would particularly like.
mhm.
She was in the church choir at St. Michael's,
Okay.
so she would enjoy hymns, the old hymns, but she also liked bluegrass, and so
Mhm.
I'm able to pull that up, and a few other things, and so she she moves her head, she taps her foot.
Mm.
She really seems to have a connection. It's the
Right,
only connection, though.
right, right. But that's when you catch a glimpse of the Janet you remember.
Ah, yes, yes,
Yeah,
yes, and an enjoyment, a peace of mind, you might say,
yeah,
that this is a place she likes to be.
yeah, yeah.
But
I mean that. Go ahead.
no, I mean that was kind of accidental, though.
Yeah.
It's amazing, and of course, I believe God puts us where we need to be.
Absolutely. And yeah, I mean that kind of leads us into the next question, which is what have been those God moments? And maybe they aren't just God moments, but where you've seen God in the mix. Um,
Yeah, I I don't really honestly think I'd be here talking to you
mm,
on my own.
mm,
I believe that without God's support, I would not have been able to cope.
mm,
Uh, the perseverance, the peace of mind, the hope that
mm.
comes because despite what's happening with Janet, there is a world out there that I don't want to stop being in.
Yeah.
Um, but on my own, I don't think I could ever come close to that.
Mm, mhm. Yeah.
So that relationship with God is what holds it all together.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's an incredible story, and I mean, again, everybody has their own story, whether it's living with dementia themselves or with a loved one who has dementia, or whether it's another challenge that they're dealing with.
Yeah.
Nobody can nobody can predict the future, and no
No,
one no one can write a script for us to tell us step by step what we need to do.
no,
Um, but
exactly.
but it sounds like God has given you glimpses of things along the way, and given you people who have spoken wisdom
Yes.
and compassion. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a big deal, and dementia it's a tricky one. Um, my own mother was diagnosed actually with Alzheimer's probably 2 months ago. We knew that something was
Uh,
going on, and it's hard when you watch somebody not able to express themselves the way that they used to be. You feel like they're not the same person, but deep down inside, they're still there. And that's part of what you're saying as well, that
yeah.
you catch these glimpses. She's there. She's just more inward.
Yeah. I look for it. I
Yeah.
look for it every time I visit her.
Yeah.
And because I guess it's good and the bad,
Mhm.
because it's happened slowly over 6 or 7 years, whatever that time is.
Mhm.
Um, there's nothing usually dramatic.
Mhm.
Most of it's just bit by bit.
Yeah.
Um, so it's giving me time to to be ready or to adjust.
Yeah.
On the other hand, particularly in the early stages, um, I would adjust to one level and then find myself down a level
Hmm.
unexpectedly,
Step
and then
forward, a step back.
yeah, and I'd adjust to that level, and then it would go some
Oh,
more.
I see. I see. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was better unsettling
Yeah.
at that point. But then I got used to that, and the curve that we could imagine kind of has a steep section and then a section that's not so steep.
Okay.
So that works that way.
Yeah, good. So, I mean, if you could say one thing to someone who is beginning to live with dementia, again, for themselves or with a loved one, what would be something that you would say to them?
I would say try to find out whatever you can. There's a lot of like the front temporal lobe dementia has an association that's online. There's books to read, and I've read a few
Mhm.
because it helps me to sort of not understand, because that would be too strong, but at least have some idea of not only what's happening, but where that's leading, so it's not quite so much of a shock.
Yeah, yeah.
And trying, I guess the second thing I would say is trying to create um, an area in your life where you're functional, because um, as human beings we have to be that way
Mhm.
to function, to survive.
Yeah. Well, it's almost like when the Gospels tell us that Jesus would go off to a solitary place. You know, he would go off with the disciples. He needed to get away from what he was dealing with every day, and there was refreshment in that.
Yeah, 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 that word respite has a lot.
Yeah, yeah. Good. Well, Doug, thank you so much.
Oh, I enjoyed this.
Yeah, it's good to hear more about your story and Janet's story. And my hope is that as people may have questions, maybe they could reach out to you.
Oh, for sure.
But yeah, again, we are all facing challenges, but God does not leave us alone in them.
No.
He walks with us through them.
And I would say my faith is stronger now than it's ever been.
Uh, that's Yeah, I mean, that's an encouragement. Sometimes we think that these things are going to defeat us. You know, the challenges of life are going to defeat us, and they don't have to. So, Doug, thank you. And I'm really glad that all of you joined us in this conversation today. Again, if you have questions, reach out to me, reach out to Doug, leave a comment below on our YouTube channel, and we would love to get in touch with you. But do stay tuned and stay safe and stay the course, because life in Jesus Christ is worth it.